Hello everybody, Mannix here. Just wanted to do a quick compare and contrast video of the Cold Steel Triad Lock and the Atlas Lock. This came out much more recently. The Triad Lock has been around for well over a decade now, almost two, as of mid-2023 anyway. It's an extremely strong locking mechanism, easily one of the strongest in the world, probably top 3. Next to the Balisong as well as the Paratrooper style knife. There's also the Ram Safe lock Cold Steel makes, but easily probably top 3, maybe top 4 at the worst. It's basically a lockback style locking mechanism. These have been around for a very long time. However, the main difference is that we have a stop pin in between the blade and the lock bar. That's our main difference here. And on top of that, these lockbacks go a lot deeper into the blade in comparison to, say, a standard lockback. But that stop pin right there takes the brunt of the positive force, that's force going on the cutting edge if you're just performing a cut or hacking through something. That tempered stop pin right there will take all of that force and prevent the blade from over traveling. The negative force, that's force going on the spine of the blade. Let's say the blade got stuck into something and you started moving it around instead of this handle moving up and down, it stays put. And as well as if you accidentally smack the spine against something. We have a cutout inside of the tang of the blade right there, as you can see, which when timed up, it is stopped by the stop pin as well as the lock bar itself. There's a torsion bar down here. You can see the very center, very thin metal bar right here that is putting force up against this lock bar. That is what springs it back into place when you stop manually depressing it. Very simple, very innovative. That stop pin not only, again, stops the positive force, but the negative force, which gets transferred down from the tang of the blade into the locking mechanism, and then it goes back to the stop pin. So it's a self-adjusting mechanism as well. The more you use this, the more you open and close this thing, the more wear and tear, the more the lock bar will sink into place because there's extra space in there as well. Very ingenious, very simple, very cheap to produce locking mechanism. It's ambidextrous. It's extremely strong. More recently, however, Cold Steel has come out with the Atlas lock. So it's also a spine actuating locking mechanism, but it works completely differently. Instead of it seesawing, it actually springs back forward. There's a spring inside of here. You cannot see it because it is embedded within the locking mechanism itself, but it's constantly springing forward. Instead of having one stop pin like we do on our Triad lock, we have 2 stop pins. The first stop pin stops this locking mechanism itself from over traveling. That stop pin was not there, the one on the right, it would just spring even more forward. The second stop pin on the left is to stop the blade from over traveling, just like the stop pin does on our Triad lock. Exact same function right there. And it is also embedded inside of the blade once it's in the open position, as you can see right there. Both stop pins get enveloped by the blade and locking bar. But wait, there's more to it. Within this locking bar, there's a lot going on. There's a bar right here, which not only helps stop the over traveling of the positive force, but this stop pin is also aiding in the blade from over traveling. So we have 2 separate metal mechanisms right there, stopping the blade from over traveling. Now, as far as negative force going on the spine of the blade, both these stop pins are stopping the tang of the blade down there. So within this metal bar on the spine, there's actually a piece underneath here. Once the space in the tang of the blade clears, the spring mechanism inside of here shoves the lock bar forward. Now this lock bar is accompanied underneath both of these stop pins and rests snugly on top of the bottom of the tang of the blade down here. So negative force is transferred from the bottom of the tang of the blade to the bottom of this lock bar, and then to both stop pins, and finally, once again, to the top of the lock bar. Very ingenious. I'd argue even more ingenious design. It's a little bit more complicated. It's a little bit more intricate, but we have even more parts working together to stop both the over travel from positive force and a negative force from closing the blade. Both of these stop pins are aiding both mechanisms, do both things. Cold Steel claims this actually holds even more weight than the Triad lock. So you could argue it is stronger than the Triad lock. This is already an extremely strong locking mechanism, the Triad lock, but they're claiming this is even stronger. However, the main advantage to this is the fidget factor. It's very easy to deploy and close this blade. You don't even have to touch the blade. You can just touch the locking mechanism and keep that space within the handle clear. And you can flick it open and close very quickly, just like you would a side actuating locking mechanism like the Benchmade Axis lock, the Spyderco Cage Ball bearing lock, the SOG arc lock, etc. So if it's stronger and faster and more convenient than the Triad lock, by convenient I mean with these lockback style folders, it's typically kind of difficult or tricky, in fact sometimes dangerous to close these one-handed because that cutting edge could drop right on your finger right there. This knife particular, this Range Boss, is particularly not very safe. You have to have your index finger all the way up there or else you risk that cutting edge coming down on you. Don't recommend you close that way. It's usually just recommend to close all lockback style folders with two hands, unless you have some other way of manipulating the blade with your one hand as well as closing the locking mechanism simultaneously. So although Cold Steel has stated this Atlas lock can hold more weight than the Triad lock, the thing is undergoing shock tests. I've seen in a video by Gideon's Tactical that the Atlas lock is not able to withstand as much shock as the Triad lock is. It could just be because of what we call too many parts syndrome. Because we have more stuff going on in here, that also means we have more liabilities. That's just how that works. The more parts you add, the more things you throw into a locking mechanism or anything in the universe, really, the more you are increasing the liabilities, the higher the chance something can go wrong. Something probably having to do with the spring, maybe one of the pins. I really don't know. It's still an extremely strong locking mechanism. One of the strongest in the world, probably the top 5 strongest locking mechanism. The shock that this Atlas lock was not able to withstand in that video anyway, was still most likely a lot more than pretty much any other locking mechanism in the world could probably withstand. That being said, are you going to be spine whacking this? Would you have to do that in the first place? As far as strength is concerned, putting weight on here, it's still stronger than the Triad locks. That's still extremely impressive in my book. The main advantage is technically it cannot withstand as much shock as the Triad lock can because this locking mechanism is just so much more simple. So we win with some strength points with the Atlas lock simply by sheer weight hanging on the handle. However, as far as shock resistance goes, we win with the Triad lock probably just because it's more simple. On top of that, it's most likely going to be a lot easier and cheaper to produce this locking mechanism. We just have a torsion bar, the locking mechanism itself, and then the stop pin. Versus here, we have the lock bar, the spring, and the 2 stop pins. But again, the big advantage I say about the Atlas lock is the ease of deployment. It's extremely fast, extremely easy to open and close. And again, on top of that, we're still getting a very strong locking mechanism, even if it can't technically withstand as much stress and shock as the Triad lock can. But when it comes to EDC, everyday carry, speed for even defense, yeah, I'm going to say the Atlas lock overall, I think it wins. I think it's a better locking mechanism for general purpose. It's still very strong. Just because it got trumped by the Triad lock and shock resistance, it doesn't mean it's a weak locking mechanism by any means, not by a long shot. Still extremely impressive, and overall I prefer it, just because it's so much easier to open and close. This, you got to kind of finagle it a little bit and be a little bit more careful. Not the end of the world, still an extremely strong locking mechanism, one of my favorites of all time, the Triad lock. But that being said, I prefer the Atlas lock, and I'm excited to see what Cold Steel uses this for in the future. What do you prefer? Do you know of any advantages and disadvantages I may have missed? Comment below. Thanks so much for watching. Mannix out.